Reinvent yourself. Welcome to the Disrupt Everything podcast series with Isra Garcia. The opportunity to live in a permanent state of reinvention and change as change happens. A space for human potential, action, holistic high performance, ultra productivity, experimental lifestyle, unstoppable attitude, disruptive mindset, coaching and self-discipline as a lifestyle, modern stoicism, impact marketing, connected leadership, and whatever comes next.
All we do is that we create a blank canvas where you can project whatever you like. This is a quote I extracted from a TED Talk from our next guest, our next disruptor. We are talking about Monique Schiess. Monique, welcome to Disrupt Everything podcast series.
Thank you so much for having me, Isra.
Disrupt Everything podcast series is a podcast about disruption, living in a permanent state of reinvention. It's a podcast about making a ruckus, about ruckus makers, game changers, people who are disrupting normal and creating a new status quo from working in projects, products, services, creating transcendental events, gatherings. Disrupt Everything was created in 2017 with the aim of deconstructing and dissecting worldwide disruptors to understand their mindset, skills, attitude, habits, routines, life hacks, productivity hacks, and also their unique gift, their singularity, this creativity or creative spirit that we all have, and this inner child, which is it manifests from in a variety of forms. Today in Disrupt Everything, we have a new guest, and as I'm talking in English, you guess is an international guest. Podcast is sometimes in Spanish when we have a Spanish guest, or I'm sharing my views and my opinions on experiments, and in English when we have a guest like me. And now we're gonna go to explain and to tell you who is a little bit of Monique, and she will tell us the rest. Thank you for being in Disrupt Everything podcast series. You are going to be disrupted.
Super, I look forward to that.
Choose yourself, change what matters, and live epically. You're listening to Disrupt Everything podcast series with Isra Garcia.
After 15 years in the desert of Tankakaru in South Africa, Monique Schiess has a doctorate in driving rebar pegs into rock and shale, and a PhD in the economics of artistic chaos and wrangling itinerant misfits and renegades. As a founder and the original coordinator of Afrika Burn, she is a fire starter of all sorts, an instigator, an incubator of creative projects across the board. She makes sport of poking people in their creative ribs, and also she believes that fun and waking up creativity is the most powerful vector of change in the world we live in today. She was a partner in the Mother City Queer Projects and has 2 degrees in environmental science and social anthropology. And also, and I love that, had an incarnation as a game ranger. She is currently the Creative Development Director and Liason for Afrika Burn. And some of you maybe, if you live in another planet, would be wondering what is Afrika Burn. Afrika Burn is an event, at least I see it, and a big take of info and a personal view of. It's an event that takes place in the Tankakaru Desert, and it's a blank canvas that participants project onto what they want. It's a duocracy. I love to say that. As such is defined by the fact that those attending the event, not the festival, make the event. It's more like a social experiment. It's like a co-living. For me, at least, it's a co-living in the desert under Burning Man principles. is a chance to feel what it's like to be human between humans that are learning how to be humans too. No? It's not a festival, as I said. It's a chance to invent the world anew. What happens out there is an explosion of creativity, inventiveness, community, gifting, civil mindedness, where we create a gifting and magic economy. Afrika Burn has been running since 2007 and is the spectacular result of the creative expression of a community of volunteers who, once a year, gather in the Tankakaru Desert to create a temporary city of art, theme camps, costume, music, and performance. For those who have not been, no, for those who have been, no explanation is necessary, and for those that haven't been there, none is possible either. For my personal experience, is one of the events that has impacted in my life most prominently, and had like big explosions of life and small and big awakenings on life, on projects, on friends. I found people that is now like my brothers and sisters, and keep creating even like challenges, going cycling from Cape Town to Africa Burn to raise funds for charity or projects that help also to empower other people. Um, if you're listening to this interview, just pay attention and to Monique and what she says and share about, on not only from her life and her passion, but also from Africa Born. And if you never consider to go there, it's a good time to consider, because it's definitely something that will impact in your life very positively. Um, so we finish this intro with another quote from Monique, which says, "We challenge you to engage. There is no massive order or structure. We challenge you to rely on yourself completely, and we challenge you to express yourself radically." This is something that happens in Africa Born. Monique, now welcome to more officially after the introduction. Welcome to Disrupt Everything podcast series, and we're happy and glad to have you here. Thank you for making the time and doing the second attempt to our interview in this, I guess, a bit cold Cape Town. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Isra. Yeah, it is a little bit chilly here, but nothing we can't survive.
What you felt about the once I was explaining who you are, what and also Africa Born, what the what did resonated with you, or what came to your mind when we were doing the introduction and saying, it's Monique Schiess and Africa Born.
I mean, it's always interesting hearing someone introduce you and sort of being so closely associated with something. But I suppose I am. But yeah, it's been I think to a degree what a fantastic journey and what a privilege it is to be on this journey, but also how my engagement with it has changed over the 15 years. Certainly not in terms of like doing overwork, etc., but certainly like the approaches and kind of feeling like I very often feel like Africa Burn is a fractal kind of thing where you look at global trends and then you look at what's happening at the burn and how to, because after 15 years you're having existential crises about like what is our relevance in the world, what is the it's a really important kind of self-reflection kind of moment to go, okay, how valid are we still in the world? Is it still doing the work that we wanted to do in the world? Should we even be engaging with it on that level? So it's interesting, and that very often mirrors the kind of the personal journey as well, because Africa Burn is such a personal journey for everyone. Those of us who started it, and those of us who work on it daily, and the people who come to the actual event too. It is a completely personal journey, And that personal journey is so important because collectively, and this is certainly true for me, is my involvement in the burn is completely and utterly informed by seeing it as a change vector. As like, for me, I didn't want to go and then, start an event that was going to titillate people just for the sake of that. For me, it's about changing the world. And so, yeah, that's pretty much where it is for me at the moment. Yeah.
How will you describe this? Not describe. How will you put on milestones this personal journey of yours, and why? What was the most important learnings in each of them? Is this? Um, can it be the 15 years? But you can go also way back if you want.
Yeah. I've had such a weird mixture of things that have kind of, from going to a Waldorf school to, living in the bush and being a game ranger, and, that deep engagement with the natural world and systems thinking. And, Waldorf education is systems thinking, basically. So there was trying to teach the whole human and inside of a whole system. And when you live in the bush, you can't not kind of engage with that, because you're living in, and with no comforts, no kind of, I was living in a reed hut with no electricity for many years. And,
Wow.
And it's such a privilege. Plus also just like reading the nuance and everything in the wild, animals, elephants, animal behavior. Sorry, I just mentioned elephants because they're my favorites, but, it's just such a privilege that, but then also realizing that absolutely everything that you do in life, whether it's waitressing or running a bush camp or having mundane conversations with tourists endlessly and endlessly and endlessly, all the way to, managing to start this event, which suddenly just exploded, unexpectedly. For me, the milestones that you speak of were things that just happened to me. We weren't planning anything specifically, It's very, very generous to think that there was a plan, So yeah, I would say absolutely formative in my life was my relationship with the natural world, the bush, animals, and having the absolute privilege to be able to access that as a white South African. Very formative also was growing up in apartheid South Africa. You cannot ignore the need to affect everything around you, not just live your life as a kind of comfortable person going to school, eating your meals, whatever, going to work. It's about changing things. But then at the same time, I was the home that I grew up in was a very creative home. My father was a playwright and director, and my mom's an actress. And so there was always plays going on, etc. And we grew up in a very kind of rich cultural environment. However, the broadest kind of environment was that of a very, very conservative. I grew up in Pretoria, which is the capital city, which was kind of the bedrock of South African conservatism at the time. I think it's still a little bit there, which is why I love Cape Town so much. But it's and so that was the context. But what I witnessed the people in theatre and art, etc., using the fact that they are tricksters in the world to be able to speak out against the apartheid government without being jailed, etc. Look, my dad's plays were very often shut down by the police because there was nudity, there were statements about, or there was kind of racial intermixing, etc. So there were so many kind of mixed kind of elements that informed. I don't know if milestones are really the kind of right words, but these are big kind of things that were very formative in my life. And I do have to say that just having an idea around, helping to start Afrika Burn and just going balls to the wall and trying this and starting a website, talking my head off, doing a lot of public speaking, which I was terrified of at the time. And then suddenly this thing just happened, and it was huge. And I remember Robert, one of my co-founders, and I standing at the event in 2007. And like, we honestly thought maybe 250 people would arrive, and suddenly there was just this line of cars coming over the horizon, and like, I was like, oh my god, that is incredible.
I'm even goosebumps right now when you say that. I can imagine. I'm trying to picture that.
So and so we both got tears in our eyes, and we were like, Jesus, look what just happened. And then it was like, shit, we better go dig more toilets, actually. And then it was interesting because just after the first event, I had just handed in my thesis. I was studying. I was working on land reform, and I'd handed in that thesis, and then there'd been a delay, and so my graduation was just after Afrika Burn, and someone had gifted me a little clan necklace, a little silver clan necklace. It was my first gift at Afrika Burn, and as I went down in the big hall to be capped, this necklace swung out, and when the photographer took a photograph, it caught the light of the pendant and it blanked out the picture. And it was so interesting for me because having done the first Afrika Burn was so much more formative for me than having submitted this thesis, even though the subject matter of it is very, very close to my heart. But that was a big moment. Yeah.
And Monique, what I have about what you said in the bush, but I'm gonna get back to the second. How did you get started with Afrika Burn? Because that's not to create like it's not a camp. You create something that I guess is being prototyped. But how did you get started? What was the original? The first steps or the original story behind that?
Well, it was yeah. I mean, it was a couple of things. The thing that for me, the model is that you create community first, and then the right thing will happen. And so we called, a whole lot of us were involved in the beginning, and we had all been fairly embedded in the creative world. Like you said earlier, I was part of a crew who organized an event called Mother City Queer Projects, and that was all around claiming it. And we started in 1994, which was when the ANC came into power at Afrika Burn. In South Africa is when it all changed. And we were so proud of our constitution. We wanted to celebrate our new constitution rather than fight for those rights. So the idea was to have an event that celebrated. It was non-ageist, non-racist, non-sexist. So it was art-based. It was very interactive, very playful, very fun, turning waste into art. All different genres of music, all ages. It was just, and so. Yeah, so that was. I can't remember where I was going with that.
You were the story behind it. So how did you get started with it?
So exactly. So and that was how I met Robert Weineck, who is one of the co-founders of Afrika Burn, and he then put me in touch with a guy called Paul Jorgensen, and we basically put together all of our little communities. And we just started having meetings and saying, look, this is the intention. If you love it, join us. If you don't, this is not a numbers game. This is just about experimenting and trying something new. And look, it's not new because there is the Burning Man model, but I do think one of the things that I absolutely adore about the Burn and the Burning Man model is that it wasn't anything pre-designed. No one came and said, hey, here's a model by which we are going to entertain you, this and that, and you need all these elements. It's basically something that rose up from the bottom, from in San Francisco back in the day, the kind of psychedelic movement, the bohemians, the cacophony society, etc. And that was a very fertile ground in which people were kind of non-conformist or questioning the kind of establishment, etc., but doing it with high levels of creativity and fun and tricksterish kind of actions, And for me, the reason why that works is because these are archetypes that pre-exist in us. They're not it's not something that you transplant from one place to another. This all lives within us, like, you know, this, and so all you do is we create that kind of opening to do that. But anyway, I mean, in terms of the mechanics of it, it was like create an intention, put together a website, start kind of speaking to different kind of groupings of people, whoever would have me talk to them. I mean, the one group was like, the one that was very interesting for me was a Christian group. They were like, well, we've heard you starting this thing. Would you come and speak to our little church group? And which was very, very interesting for me.
Wow.
And it was one of the most stimulating chats that I've ever had. I mean, like, it went on until 2 a.m. because we were having this deep kind of philosophical engagement. And they came to the first Afrika Burn, and they said they felt like it was the most Christian festival they'd ever been to. And I think they were also our first naked people as well. So
it's because what you say is you go to Afrika Burn and it doesn't matter what you are, you fit in.
Yeah.
Because it's in the roots, it's the archetype, right?
Yeah.
And Monique, what Afrika Burn has taught you about creativity that you can apply in everyday life?
I think how important creativity is, and what a deep, deep vector for change it is. And again, this is not any kind of academic thinking about it. I think this is a fundamental, foundational element in the world, and I mean, you can see it in kind of Greek mythology. You know, the underworld. The underworld has got the 2 rivers in it. The one's Lethe, and the other one's Mnemosyne. And Lethe is the time of forgetting. It's where you lose yourself. That's where the words lethargy and lethal, etc., come from. But the other river going in the other direction is Mnemosyne, and that was the mother. She was the mother of the muses. And the muses are the source of creativity. It's the inspiration for creativity. And so what it is, it's not actually discovering parts of yourself. It's remembering parts of yourself. Because if Lethe is the forgetting, Mnemosyne is the remembering. And again, the broader context. So again, it's fractal. Because we do that at Afrika Burn, we've got the smaller system where we create like a difficult space to be in. I know it's incredibly beautiful, but the kind of harsh environment has its function. You know, it challenges you on every level physically. I mean, we were very lucky this year because the weather was so good. But you know, when that wind blows, when the wind blows and the heat's hot and the cold's cold and you're just beyond your comfort zone, it cracks you open. And there's a function in that because it's also incredibly beautiful. So that's the beauty and the kind of, you know, also the word music comes from the word muse. So does museum, the house of the muses. So does amusement, you know, so the playfulness and the fun. I think that's, and so for me, it's a very direct relationship, is that accessing your creativity, no matter who you are, you do not need to be an artist, is a very huge healing thing. And it's not just, it heals the individual and it heals the collective and it heals in a bigger way. And if you think about the broader context, especially now post-COVID or in COVID or whatever, and the whole world is disrupted. You know, we're in the time of the ashes. We're in the moment where everything was shaken and changed, and it's not like we need to go and bring all the same things back into line again. It's like, how do we change it? And which is why, for me, the burn is important. Is that because people who go to the burn, so I don't want to overload the importance of the burn in terms of changing the world, but for me, this is my motivation personally for doing it, is that when people are accessing their creativity and being able to challenge themselves, collaborate for the first time, have fun where they have forgotten how to have fun, to play, to, you know, these are all very experimental actions. They're absolutely, I mean, I don't know if you know, there was a guy called John Huizinga who wrote a book in the 1930s called Homo Ludens. And he was arguing that humans should not be called Homo sapiens because wisdom doesn't make us who we are. It's the play impulse that does. Yeah, exactly. And And so that moment of play, and there's a whole lot of things operating in the playing. I mean, it's not just like, oh, let's be like children. It's like there's a very important generative process that's happening there. And so what's important about experimenting is that, and doing it in such a kind of generative and happy space, because that really begets more of itself, is that also when the shit's going down, there are ideas that are lying around that you can go and utilize, and that has proved itself in the world all over, and very often the best scientists are people who have completely accessed their creativity. You very often find hardcore scientists being really brilliant artists. Although I also don't want to make the, feed that dichotomy between science and art, because they are both fundamentally creative kind of areas to be in. I don't, So for me, disrupting those kinds of binaries is also really important.
It's a very interesting interrelationship between what you're saying and the interview that just did a few episodes ago with Jamie Will, because we chat about these humoludens, about the necessity of disrupting, the playing, the care the playground. He talks about the sexual yoga of becoming, the hedonic engineering. So, as someone who has such a diverse diversity of backgrounds, obviously, how do you describe what you do to someone you met for the first time? I was wondering.
Well, I do struggle with that.
Me too. This is why I ask you.
Because like one of my absolute worst summaries of what I do is people go, "She's an event organizer," and I'm like, "Well, no. I mean, organizing an event is secondary. That's just a tool. There's like that's just a mechanical cog in a wheel and that. So I mean, funny enough, I said the other day to someone, they said, "So what do you do?" And I said, "Well, we design the apocalypse recreationally to crack people's hearts open."
Oh wow!
And no, but interestingly enough, that's the recreational apocalypse comes from Joseph Pratt, who used to be the emergency services manager for Burning Man. But funnily enough, it was Jamie Will, in fact, who described the 3 Burning Mans. And so there's the Burning Man, which is in the public perception. It's the festival kind of Instagram view, the brochure shots that end up in the in social media and all media, Then there's the Burning Man, the next Burning Man, which is the awe-inspiring thing. You arrive there, you're like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. Wow, 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 I'm inspired. But the Burning Man that for me personally, that I'm always aiming to make sure is happening is the Burning Man that cracks you open, And it doesn't always, you never have 100% hit rate, particularly in the age of kind of convenience culture, etc., and things getting a little bit easy, which is the kind of self-reflection that we have to do about, the burn at this juncture as well. It's very easy for kind of the default world to slip into what we're doing. But fundamentally that, and actually there was I think he was a Christian writer called Richard Rohr, and I found the snippet from him very early on, like I think in 2007, and it framed my thinking around the challenges that we were going to face at Afrika Burn. And he spoke about how you move from man to mantra man, movement, mantra, museum, monument, and our challenge is to keep it in movement, because otherwise it's very easy. So if you're not deeply engaging with global trends and how they're affecting the way that you embody the principles and the agreements around that space that we occupy together, then it's very easy for them to become glib slogans, empty of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just slogans. You've got to live with them, and they've got to be alive. They've got to be in movement, because then it becomes just a staid museum piece or a monument. It's not alive anymore. Which for me personally is where I am at the moment, is questioning our relevance and saying, okay, what are the fundamentals that keep this thing doing the work it's supposed to do? Because I don't want to use judgment. I don't want to say, keep it pure, because what is purity? But to keep it doing the work that it should be doing in the world is important.
And what are those fundamentals
I'll
that
let
you
you know.
are?
I'll let you know when I have the answers.
We'll do the second round. We'll do the second round.
Well, it's anything. Look, it's anything that engages people, anything that is generative, because to a degree, the passivity of the default world, that transactional passivity, the commodified space, especially now in the age of people's bodies and their faces becoming a commodity. Like, I'm not a brand, I'm Monique, and so like watching the Instagram culture where people are doing product placement at the Burn, etc. Like, so interesting.
Wow.
But is the answer to just ban everything, because that's just a pendulum swing reactionary thing? So these are the kind of questions that I'm asking myself, and then you've got to kind of like really explore the permutations of, because I remember when my friend Stephen Rasper, who is part of Burning Man, when he described how Larry Harvey wrote the actual principles of Burning Man, and it was in 2004, and they said, look, Larry, like, all these regional events are starting to pop up, and you need to actually write down what it is that we do. And apparently he was very reluctant to actually write them down, because he was like, no, they're going to become dogma, And they said, well, you actually have to go forth and do them. So he did. Apparently he went off, and Stephen Rasper said he came back to the office looking agitated, and his head had turned into a cauliflower because he'd been grappling so much. And he said, here they are. And so it's interesting to because there's that whole phenomenon where people become like burnier than thou. And they're like, well, and I very often get it, funnily enough, in the desert, like, because I'm so busy that I don't have time to dress up. I just wear very functional clothing, and I'm running around, etc. And I'll get people who like snarl at me and go, why don't you make an effort and wear a nice outfit? And I'm like, okay, fine, whatever.
Yeah. That's very, very interesting. On Monique, and what insights have you about the leadership in Afrika Burn have you gotten?
Insights about leadership? You mean like being a leader, or how it should be led?
Exactly. How, like, being a leader, and also how, like, the kind of leadership that happens when in Burning Man, even if it's in the organization or between camps. I mean, it's a really open leadership. It's a model to play with, right?
Look, I mean, it's a very interesting thing around, because you have a burn, and it's a cultural movement at best. I mean, that's, there's often different kind of interpretations, but it's a living, breathing, amorphous. Culture is not static. It's an ever moving, ever growing and changing thing. And so you get, and then you've got the requirements of the default world is to have some kind of organizational structure and statutory things. Civic mindedness kind of dictates that. We actually have to have audits and structures and minutes and AGMs and all that kind of thing. And there's always been, and I think there possibly will always be, a tension between those two worlds colliding. And so, for example, like having the word directors, CEO, like those things have never sat comfortably with me. And I know that in some of the organizations, they invent new titles, but it's very easy to default back to the default world settings. So Afrika Burn, for example, is a not-for-profit company. And we've got members, and we've got directors, and then we've got operations team, and we respond to kind of the national laws to do that. But it's always there's always a kind of, in terms of the default world structures that we have to engage with, there's always going to be, I think, a slight kind of weird difficulty there. in terms of leaders that actually just emerge, because I think it's quite natural to have leaders. We aim to have a flat structure, but there are leaders, camp leaders, artwork leaders, and it's not a power dynamic thing. It's just some people, and doesn't mean one's better than the other, but some people do.
Yeah, taking the lead.
They see a vision and they enthuse everybody to join them and go there. And I think that should just be enabled in whatever way possible. And I mean, I think that's our only job, is to enable people as much as possible. We just have to be an enabling environment, no matter what level you operate on, whether it's, our office manager or, the person leading the MOOP line or, whatever. But it is an interesting thing. And I know, for example, being a founder of Afrika Burn, one of the founders of Afrika Burn, I think quite a lot of people do look to me for leadership sometimes, or as a leader, and it's quite an uncomfortable position personally for me to be in. I do like visioning things and going there, but it's quite interesting. Yeah.
That was what I was going to ask you. Like, have you follow a model or any process to lead, coordinate Afrika Burn teams or departments?
So we've tried a couple of different things, just because of that kind of like that inflection point that I was describing earlier, is that, so we've tried holacracy, which is a system where, especially because we are consensus based, right? So efficiency is not our metric, because we consult and consult and consult. We consult with each other, then we consult with another department, and then we consult with the community, and all of this takes time. Obviously, we don't do it for every single thing we do, but there are certain things that are important. Sound, for example, is important. All these. We're having a discussion around whether we need to change the wording around tickets, change them to memberships like Borderland does. Because the ticket implies that I'm paying you and you must give me something back, Whereas a membership is a much broader, like you're just part of a community, and this money is just for actually putting in the infrastructure, And so, but it's been interesting to see how the kind of leaders emerge through Afrika Burn, and you get so many different kinds as well. I mean, I could write a very long, interesting book on the different kind of creative crew leaders, because as the creative director, I have been very, very involved with a lot of different creative crews on a very deep level. And kind of watching the way that they operate is, the pendulum swings from kind of lots of shared appreciation and patchouli oil and namaste all the way to the like leather pants wearing, coke snorting, tequila swilling kind of like rock star, to the militant guy, to the people who absolutely workshopped the sculpture so much that it almost didn't get built because they were so busy workshopping what it should be. There's so many different ways of doing this.
That's a very, very interesting tapestry.
Yeah, absolutely.
What have you learned from or about yourself in all these years in Afrika Burn? There's a lot of burns, a lot of work, a lot of time with yourself, like working, like also, like so for yourself. And
I think what I learned is that if you operate from a very pure place, and by saying pure, I mean from a place where you are living your convictions. And certainly I know myself in terms of that the work that I do needs to have meaning, and it needs to change the world. And I think that if you're doing that, you don't have to do too much, because the right thing will happen, Like I said, we didn't really plan much with Afrika Burn. We just went balls to the wall. But it was a very pure impulse that I think we were all operating from. It was like, wow, let's give this a try. But it's been a very interesting journey. I still get bemused and surprised by it constantly. I'm like God, did that happen in the last 15 years? Oh, look. And I think the other thing is to actually take on board that it has been formative and changed many people's lives. And certainly observing how it's changed the cultural landscape just in our city and in South Africa, like I've noticed such changes. And the thing is that we're not, I mean, we do, yeah, we do, yeah. Because also we do these town-based events, the one called Streetopia, so trying to bring the culture to town and, inhabiting, and basically what art and creativity does to a space. And that's what I remember the one day kind of like I was really, really tired and I was walking from my camp to our morning meeting and I was a little bit early and I kind of stood on the edge of the desert and I looked at it and I was just like, what is it? What is it that people love so much? What is operating here? What makes this work so well as a little city? And the thought that kind of I was just musing on it, and when you're walking and musing, things come to you. But and then I realized actually what this is it's a little city where creative projects, the creative project to city infrastructure ratio is inverted compared to what you get in town, right? And so, which is important, and it makes it a very rich, a very safe, a very fun, a very stimulating place. The other thing is that people are generating it. It's not us who are the organizers who make that space. It's everybody who comes there, and that's what participation requires that you do. You think of a thing, and you make it tangible in the world, and you come and you share it. I mean, it's a really simple thing. But just that act is such a creative act, whether it's a tray of cookies, whether it's a spray of a cold bottle, whether it's a compliment, a hug, whatever, all the way up to a giant sculpture which gets burnt and, all that kind of stuff. And it's such a generative space. And we want to create. I think that's another archetype. Humans want to create. We don't want to be passive.
I think this is extremely powerful. I've been involved in projects with the Burning Man and Afrika Burn that I've done, like the mostly like the social challenge fundraising. Like biking. I did a 3 from San Francisco to Burning Man non-stop,
Oh, wow.
53 hours. Then in 2018, I did a ride all by myself from Hollywood to Gerlach by my 8 days. But this year was the first year in Afrika Burn that I did an activation. I put 2 chairs, 1 table, and a sign that said, "Tell me I'm listening," and I just sit there. And I had one of the wildest, rewarding experiences of my life. And I've devoted all my life to create positive impact and service. I must say. But one day, because I always did it from 3 p.m. onwards, and one day was close to the temple. And one day, like very, not in the near playa. And one day was sunsetting, and I look at the sky and I start crying. And I said, "It's the first time in my life that I do so less that what you said and get so much in return." And it just changed the way I approach. And now with this sign, going to metros, public stations, and opening there and sitting there. And Milan Malpensa the other day, and it's incredible. It's incredible how you can take this and create impact in the world.
Yeah, that is fantastic. That is fantastic.
Incredible.
And it's interesting because that's one of the, you said you like that quote, "Imagine first, reason later." And that is from a guy called Nabil Hamdi, who wrote a book called Small Change. And he was tasked, he was an architect, he was tasked with building a community center. I think it was in Bangladesh or somewhere. And he was just like, "Okay, I'll do that, but give me time." And so he just watched the space first. He just watched and watched and watched. And he thought, okay, the only thing I'm going to do is he put up a street light. And then he watched what happened. And so it's a small intervention. It's just a street light. And kids started coming and doing their homework at night. Someone would come and start selling their fruit and vegetables, etc. Slowly it starts getting activated. Then he does another intervention. He gets them to route a bus through there. So the bus stop starts happening there, but everyone's congregating around that light at night. Obviously, it was under-resourced space. Eventually, he built the community center, but at least then it was completely utilized. Whereas, in the world, you get all these like well-meaning projects in the world where where these interventions that are just not appropriate, or they haven't kind of been brought from the bottom up. But your story made me think about that, because that very you're just offering a space, like it's and
you're just there,
yeah, and it's just immediate and beautiful, and and that's such a fundamental need in us, especially in the age of staring at your devices all the time.
Yeah, and people is looking for these places of engaging. Monique, what was your biggest takeaway after last 2022 Afrika Burn?
2022, sorry. I had a lot of anxiety about 2022, obviously. Primarily around the new event site. That was getting our new forever home and our land, etc., was very much a project that I had initiated and pushed forward. And in my enthusiasm that I had presented around the project, I was very much hiding that I had a lot of self-doubt about it. And so working really, really hard to make sure, until kind of like day 5 of the event, I still wasn't sure that it was working, but then obviously it did. And I think so. I think the biggest, I don't quite know what the biggest takeaway from 2022 was, but because it felt to a degree like we were back in 2007, because we were restarting, not only on a new piece of land, but also after COVID, of this 2-year break and the kind of severe financial kind of worries that we've had around that. But I think it was definitely, I got to revisit how much I actually love the burn. I think that was it. Is like, so it's extremely stressful. It was extremely stressful. I was really exhausted, but I definitely felt that it was operating from a place of love, and I certainly do love it. And I think to be reminded of that was a very valuable moment for me. It was like, yeah, I love this, and I love that person, I love that person, I love all these people, and I love that piece of sky, and I love that mountain, and just love everybody. Don't love that car, but
Pick 3 things that you have used from your work at Afrika Burn that have improved your life.
3 things, did you say?
Yes.
3 things that I've taken from Afrika Burn that have improved my life. Meeting the best humans in the world ever. Honestly, like, I had such fantastic friends before we started Afrika Burn, and now I just know a million more beautiful people. So yeah, that's the one thing. I certainly learned how to construct very large-scale sculptures, which is very useful. So I've learned a lot of kind of engineering and stuff like that, which I really do like, knowing that kind of stuff. I am a generalist. I do believe the world needs more generalists. So like having, yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. So more people being able to do
multi-potential.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just been a very visceral kind of experiential learning around how close to the surface our creativity is, because all we do is recreate that space. People come into it and they access stuff. So basically, because I know in my mind, because like I said earlier, I studied environmental science, and when we started Afrika Burn, well, when I'd finished the environmental science degrees and was in that field, I was it's a thing that I absolutely love. I want to save the environment, and I want things to be organized in a way that makes more sense, so that we're not killing the earth, and it's totally possible, and all that kind of stuff. But I was, in my mind, the framing in my mind was that had to be fought for. So it was constantly a fight in my mind. You've got to picket, white papers, that kind of stuff. And so my involvement in getting involved in the burn was like, and that's where I say, fun and play are vectors for change. And so that was a fundamental learning for me, is that the flow of that is just so much faster, and it really does incredible stuff. So yeah, I think that's one of the fundamental takeaways for me.
And 3 things from your creative and creator background that have helped you to improve Afrika Burn?
I think creativity is fundamentally experimental. So being able to be experimental is very helpful. Yeah. And being experimental requires flexibility. So it's actually been quite nice being able to do a town plan on an ephemeral city where you can change things, it didn't work this year, it's fine, we'll change it, I think certainly being able to express yourself and tell stories about it is important, was a very useful thing. So being able to communicate as much as possible what we were trying to do, and to be a storyteller of stories that have happened at the burn, because those are very often very useful vectors of information. I love stories. For me, that's always the thing that kind of brings the story home, or brings the piece of information home, is a story about it, Gosh, a third. Do you have to ask for 3 all the time?
The last one is the last time I asked for 3.
Oh, okay.
I must say that.
Okay. Another creative thing. Possibly, and maybe it's not kind of overtly creative, but possibly the. I think that I have quite a attuned sense of space, and so I've always done the curation, like curatorial aspect of Afrika Burn, placing theme camps and artworks, etc. So possibly that.
And Monique, do you have any particular process for developing creative projects?
Yeah. Imagine first, reason later.
I love that. You know that.
But also my friend Mark Thomas, who in fact, he's house utilizing his far more stable internet than mine. His whole motive is, if you can draw it, you can make it. So you have to sketch. And then you must talk
maker mentality.
Yeah. And then you must just talk your head off about it. And it's been very interesting through all these years, assessing kind of like the proposed artworks, etc. And very often the most brilliant drawing, a CAD drawing with this and that, or a SketchUp 3D model, blah, 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 doesn't necessarily mean that the artwork's going to be good. We've taken sketches on serviettes as creative grant applications, and very often that, what emanates from. So it's not a direct relationship. There's so many kind of different variations of how people express themselves. But however, I think a very key thing is that we don't ever, the narrative of success. We certainly ask ourselves the question when we're assessing grants, because that's the only moment you're allowed to be judgmental at Afrika Burn. It's when we're assessing grants. And we do ask ourselves, what's the chance of success on this piece, Basically, because if someone who has no engineers, architects, or any prior building experience is planning an extremely large sculpture, then, you got to go, hey, you need a team, you need teammates who are going to handle that side of things. But yeah, it's I found it hard to track what the actual process is. But certainly the drawing and the imagining, and then cajoling humans. being very open is so important.
Yeah.
Inviting and enthusing people into it, inviting community in to build something with you. And certainly in my friend group, we've always had a lot of children in my camp, and they've been coming since they were like 7 to the burn, and now they're in their 20s, and they all they join, and it's amazing. Yeah.
What has been the biggest challenge for Afrika Burn since you have been there, and how you overcome it? How you overcame it? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of multiple challenges. Obviously, at the moment, it's a financial one, very distinctly, post-COVID, because we've missed 2 large-scale events. But I think it's the tendency for the default world to start entering that space. And I'll be more specific about it. So, for example, plug and plays, the proliferation of festival culture. So for me, like the aesthetic look of Afrika Burn, just as an example, the aesthetic look of Afrika Burn has changed. You're not seeing as many homemade outfits as you used to, Everyone's going on to festigear.com, or, I don't even know if that exists. I'm just saying it as for argument's sake. But and I'm really glad that these smaller kind of businesses have sprung up from it. But that kind of the
creativity, right?
Exactly, because it's consumptive. It's like, oh well, but I want to look like that other person who's wearing that festival outfit or whatever. There is very much a festival aesthetic these days, and so, I remember, people would wear these outfits that were a complete parody. The one was like secretary with Ebola, wearing a crimpoline, like horrible secretary's outfit, and flaky skin and blood coming out of his eyes and his ears, and that was just hilarious. But now it's all about, do I look good in a, sheer outfit or whatever?
I look beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, and so the growth of festival culture has become quite consumptive, and so that's one of our biggest challenges. Was like, I quite miss when, how popular we've become, like. And that was always the challenge. We always asked ourselves that question, is like, how do we not become victims of our own success? Because when we were underground, it's fairly pure. It takes a high commitment to come out to the desert and to create that space, etc. And then slowly, as we were becoming more kind of visible in the media and all that kind of stuff, sure, there's a great thing about it because you want
influencers and all these things. Yeah,
exactly. But you want more people to pass through it because theoretically, in its best iteration, it is going to be changing people's lives. However, for me, that's a big challenge at the moment. Is that part? And I do think that there are interventions that we can do, and we have done interventions, like especially around plug and play camps, for example. And we don't ever have 100% hit rate, but we got quite strict about it because we didn't want it to get out of hand. Then it was interesting because in 2010 the national law changed because when South Africa hosted the FIFA World Cup, FIFA required that South Africa changed the national events legislation. So it became a lot harder to get your event permits. And that was when the kind of upswing in people outsourcing the erection of tents happened. So we are actually in a process of reviewing that right now, around the sizes that we'll allow to have been professionally erected or not, etc. In the old days, we put up all of our own Bedouin tents. So
how do you? I have a side question from it. As a lot of
Europeans
were this year like massive, maybe you realize, right?
50%.
Right. Wow.
We had 50% foreigners, yeah, more or less, 48, 50.
So how do you see the psychedelic movement impacting in Afrika Burn in the post-festival world, which is radically different from the back in, should I say, old days? But I think you get what I'm hearing. Like psychedelic experience in a place like Afrika Burn has changed radically in the past few days, in the past last years. But last years were not is not right because they were not born. But since 2019 to 21,
Yeah.
did you see? Did you see what happened there? What did you felt like?
I'm not sure if I'm getting your question correctly. You said in a post festival world.
No, yes, in a pre. Sorry. So how this affected now that the only people doesn't only is not customs is also how they manage the use of psychedelics in these festivals.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not sure that I'm getting your question right, but I think that, I mean, the impulse to gather and to have ecstatic dance and to have kind of spiritual experiences, and you can read spiritual as psychedelic for me. Like for me, I mean, there's actually a lot of research which would indicate that actually psychedelics were being used for a bazillion years, in all of these.
This is the link what I'm trying to take. Is for a spiritual awakening, but we are using for a fake entertaining thing, which is.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think so. For me, it's the frequency with which it gets used. So for me, like, again, Afrika Burn or A Burn or these kinds of gatherings are a version of that old impulse to gather and to generate a space and to be in a liminal space or a cracked part of the world or whatever, like whatever you create that environment, which is a portal through which you leap. And very often psychedelics help with that, taking psychedelics help with that. And I think that this is the interesting thing around, again, it's a global trend, is because with commodification of everything and consumerism and consumptiveness and passive everything, the overuse of psychedelics is a concern for me, because I think, and it's the same principle that occurs with play, because a lot of the studies around play are that it has to be ephemeral, it has to be fleeting, because it's a very short, sharp, deep experience, and then you have to have the other side of it where you come out of it and reflect and do that kind of stuff. And certainly, I mean, like, I've done quite a few ayahuascas and mushroom ceremonies, but I certainly am very, very reverent of the period of time prior and after, and will do it maybe once every 2 years or something like that, or when I get the calling. And I feel so. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a symptom of the hyper-consumptive world that we live in. I can reach Zen or Nirvana or whatever by taking this, and so in a way, like, and I don't want to be biased, I think having that very kind of intense space out in the desert, very beautiful, very hard, all that kind of stuff, it can be called a psychedelic experience, whether you take
that's the psychedelic experience itself.
Yeah, exactly. So
I agree with that.
Exactly, because what it's doing, and interestingly enough, there's also research which shows how engaging with art can also change your neural pathways, just like a psychedelic can. And it affects the normative side of your brain, or the default settings of your brain. And really, I mean, that's what its work is to try and shift patterns. And so if the burn is doing its work in the way that it should be, that's what it should be doing, whether you actually take a substance or not. So I think, to answer your question, I do. It does concern me personally that people overuse those kind of mind-altering drugs, and then to the degree where it almost becomes commonplace rather than a moment which is deep and meaningful and then can be taken away and contemplated, etc.
Thank you for that answer. How can we have a healthy creative life? How do you do it?
I don't think I'm the right person to answer that.
Like a
But
healthy creative life, but no healthy.
I do. I do think no, because for me the irony is that I've been so busy kind of trying to facilitate everyone else's creativity by creating being involved in creating Afrika Burn that my own creativity has become quite. I haven't got space for it, but I will say that I think creating space is the first thing to do. To just stop, and then to just sit, to pause, yeah. And so, because that's what Afrika Burn is, we create space. We go, here's a platform, do the thing on it, don't do the thing on it. There's no judgment. And I think the no judgment is also very important, because I certainly know growing up, because I just wanted to be an artist. But I had a self-critical thing going on in my head about, like, is this painting good enough? So I think creating space and no judgment, but I think and in terms of Afrika Burn, what I've seen is being open to collaboration. The levels of creativity just skyrocket. They really, because it's a generative space, it becomes kind of quite alchemical. You know, when you go, hey, I've got this idea, and then it just starts, like, you get these different layers, like, oh, I'll do the projection, and what if we do that, and I'll do the lighting and the soundscape and the no. But if it's a quiet personal creativity, I think, yeah, create space, give yourself the space to, yeah.
Sorry, you were saying?
No, and then the play aspect, experimental play, yeah.
And what do you think? Or what are your top skills to help others to stay creative?
Curiosity. I think a curiosity. I think mimicry is important as well.
Okay.
You know, there's a theory that there is no such thing as original art. You know, everything is mimicry. Yeah, and play as well.
How do you cope with stress, Monique?
How do I cope with stress? I walk in the mountains a lot here in Cape Town. I think I rely on friends quite a lot. Yeah, it's pretty much just that. And sometimes I don't cope with stress.
That's why. That's how you cope with the stress.
I'm just like, I'm not okay. Oh, actually, you know what? Therapy. No. Therapy is a fantastic thing to do. I think everyone should not be shy of going and getting help. It's not a natural thing to think that you have to handle everything on your own in this default world of ours. And whatever your therapeutic complex is, it doesn't have to be a walk in a mountain. It could be a coach. It could be a yoga session, a breathing session. But ask for help. Go and get it. And that spending money on therapy is a very, very valuable investment to make.
Any of these therapies that have helped you the most? Any of them that you've proven effective for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've done a lot of different therapies, all the way, you know, from normal talkie psychoanalysis therapy. My dad was a dream analyst, so I listened to my dreams a lot. Because, you know, because he was a writer, he spoke in the language of stories, and so he was very attuned to kind of like, oh, that's that, because obviously the dreams are speaking in stories too. So he was, so we used to, you know, around breakfast start analyzing our dreams, and in fact, the very first dream that I had that he recorded, which I think I had when I was about 5. I was in our neighborhood. We used to play on the street a lot, and I was in the neighborhood, and this giant pink devil came walking down the street, and all the kids scattered because they thought, well, it's a devil. And I thought, God, but he looks so interesting. So I was sneaking in the bushes next to him, watching him. He was very oversized, probably about 2 stories high. And I started thinking, well, actually, this guy's quite nice. So I went up to him and I made friends with him. And then I ran from door to door to door, getting all the kids out of their houses, and we ended up playing. And obviously, my 5-year-old brain didn't understand that is a pan archetype, the trickster, the invitation to play. I interpreted it as a devil because he was cloven hooved, but he had a pan pipe and he had a necklace, and he was just a lot of fun. So it's very interesting because obviously it feels like that was predictive, like that's what Afrika Burn is, and we also end up sitting in a circle, like inviting people to play.
Come here.
Yeah. So I listen to my dreams. Another skill is listening to your body. I've recently done a couple of red retreats, these kind of women's gatherings where you do a lot of embodied practices and a lot of kind of tantric work. And those have been absolutely valuable, ridiculous. And then also the medicine plants have been fantastic too. But I also don't think that they would have necessarily been as fantastic if I hadn't done all the other work prior and post.
That's the most important part of a big experience, such as medicine. You just have to do the work.
Exactly. Yeah, the intentionality and the kind of contemplation and inviting your ancestors in, and whatever your shtick is, but being very, very intentional and reverent for what it is, not just doing it in a light-hearted manner.
What would you say that are your most successful habits, and why?
My most successful habits. I think getting into nature is a very key one that I don't default on that. It's a very, very important one for me. I'm very, very curious about everything. I want to know the backstory to everything, which is why I always like looking at the myth behind any kind of archetype that I'm engaging with. Because a myth is a lovely. It's a thing that it tells a story, and I read voraciously. Yeah.
If you were about to redesign your life now with the tools, knowledge, and wisdom that you have, would you redesign anything?
Sorry, can you just give me the start of that again? If
you were about to redesign your life now,
okay.
Yes, would you? Yes, no. What?
I think I would have maybe a little bit more fun, like take a little bit less responsibility, like hand over a lot more responsibility earlier. Yeah.
Now we go with a kind of rapid fire questions before ending the interview. Thanks, Monique, up until now for your openness and engaging with us, also playing with us. I have also a quote who also rescued from you that says, "Play to what can be." It's a beautiful quote, by the way. Can you share with us some moment at Afrika Burn that you will never forget?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many, but the one that just popped into my head now, I'll tell you. I was having quite a rough. It was the night of the clan burn in 2013, I think. Yeah, and someone had set up a party right close to the clan, so we had to move that and then set up the perimeter, and people were having the best time, and it was really hard to set up the perimeter at that stage. But anyway, we were getting there, and I was having to kind of march around and be quite kind of like forceful about where people stood. And I was like, come on, you just got to help me here, hold the line. Because it's always hard in that kind of environment to start setting order. And just just in the week prior to the burn, a friend of mine had lost his baby finger. He was working on a trailer, and the trailer collapsed and cut his finger off. Anyway, he went to the hospital and he came back to the burn. And he's approaching. Anyway, I finally got the perimeter set up, and he swaggers through and he just starts walking up to the clan. And I go and I stop him and I say, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but you actually can't. I've only just set up the perimeter, and if you walk in, everyone else is going to walk in." And out of his pocket, he takes out a small coffin. And it's got his finger in the coffin. And
Wow.
he says to me, I'd really like to burn this in the clan. And I was like, please go right ahead. So yeah, just so that you know, we've burnt human flesh in the clan before.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
What's the most impressive thing you ever seen in the desert so far?
Sure. God, there's so many. But artwork wise, I would say the sculpture called Subterfuge was just absolutely sublime. I don't know if you know it, Subterfuge. It was these beautiful tall spires which were color coded to pick up the desert hues at different times of the day with different light. It was just the most incredible in these fundamental shapes. And it was a statement against fracking. You know, they were trying to frack in the Karoo at the time. And the artist wanted
Which
to do
Afrika Burn was this?
2014 and 15 it stood.
Haven't been.
Yeah.
I start coming in 2017, so I missed that.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, if you do search Subterfuge, there's lots of photos of it. But
Yes, Subterfuge.
yeah.
And we'll put it on the podcast show notes also.
Okay, yeah. Nathan Honey, the artist, he wanted to illustrate outside of the ground what the violation would be going into the ground. You know, the depth. So it was very tall. It was 30 meters tall. It was just such a sublime piece. I just loved it so much, and it was so interesting because everyone was so attached to it. That on the night that it was supposed to burn, it had been dead still for days. And probably about 4 minutes before we ignited it, this wind just picked up and we had to cancel. So it stood for another year.
Mm.
And then there was also Lizzie, the flaming dinosaur. I don't know if you've seen Lizzie the dinosaur. Oh, God, absolutely sublime. Yeah.
Monique, what do you feel most excited about now?
For me personally, a little bit of time off, but certainly the land project at Afrika Burn is a huge thing for me. You know, we've been having these eco trips where we do ecological restoration work on the property, and the sheer volume of potential that exists from now having that space. And the potential for just to mix in our intentionality around kind of walking our talk environmentally, you know, expanding the leave no trace from just leaving no trace to actually literally being generative, not even regenerative, but actually generative, you know, like,
wow.
So currently we're busy processing all the sewage into compost, into human manure. We've been collecting seeds, you know, and we've had these eco trips, which are these small events. And interestingly, a lot of people who come to eco trip have never been to Afrika Burn, and then they end up coming to Afrika Burn. But it really attracts a different kind of human who wouldn't necessarily go to a festival, and it's really deepening the engagement there. So yeah, the sheer level of potential, and also what that space could mean for the whole creative community. Because it really distinctly moves us out of that short, sharp time around April, May to an all year round possibility thing. Yeah.
It's incredible.
Because also, I mean,
can you?
Yeah. No, in terms of like our relevance in the world, like I do think that there are two items without getting too serious, but we can't ignore the environmental imperative. And we also can't ignore integration. No one in this world can be passive about integration. So kind of looking at what that space can allow in terms of that, and hopefully, if we're doing it well, it moves horizontally out into the world. So really engaging.
It's not only 1 month.
Yeah.
Monique, can you name a behavior or a habit that you feel is weird and you cannot get rid of?
That is weird.
Or you feel like unusual. We'll say that.
God, these are interesting questions. No, I think my default is weird. So like nothing feels weird.
My whole default. Yeah.
Oh, wait, my dark secret is that I'm very normal.
I love that.
My dark secret is that I actually don't really like going to festivals that much.
What would you say to your college self after her big, her first big rejection or her first big disappointment?
Don't worry about what other people think of you. Yeah. So and yeah, be brave. Bravery for me is one of the best results of my experience with Afrika Burn, and I do see other
Love
people
that.
who come there becoming more brave. And brave really is being afraid of doing something but still doing it, you know. And I think that my bravery muscle was exercised so radically in doing this event. Yeah.
How does Monique pursuit of happiness looks like?
It's interesting because I was just reading a piece by what's his name again? It's in Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And his whole point is that you can't pursue happiness. You've got to do things you love, and then happiness ensues. And that has been my experience in a massive way. Is that so? And that's the thing. Is like so. And that's often what I said when we were starting Afrika Burn. People couldn't understand. They were like, "Wait, you want us to come to the desert? You want us to bring everything we need and gifts and work our tits off and pay you a ticket price?" And all I could say was like, "I promise you, it's going to be gratifying. I promise you." And that's working on that principle, because I know that yes, working in like howling wind or freezing cold or really hot heat, drilling in nails isn't necessarily people's classic version of happiness, but the happiness does come from that, you know. It's from buying into something bigger than yourself. You're adding to something bigger. And so for me, that's happiness, is participating in something larger than myself.
Yeah, big details doesn't matter until small details matters first,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But certainly a day on the beach is great.
Camps
Reading a
Bay, for
book.
example.
I don't know, land, I
When
don't know. Yeah.
when a lowest point when a lowest point has become a catalyst for you in your career?
I feel like I've been very lucky, in that I don't necessarily feel like I've had a lowest point, but I do. Certainly after 2017, I questioned whether I could continue doing Afrika Burn. Like, it was such a hard year. Like, there was nothing that was easy that year. It was absolutely hellish. So that was a kind of an inflection point, a moment of kind of self-reflection around whether I wanted to do it or not. But that is an important moment, because then you just start going, actually, it's fine. You can't say you're going to do an experiment if you're not going to be up for failure. And failure is, you know, qualified. It's not a classic form of failure. But yeah, and so from that, I accessed a whole lot of the flip side of that, of just like absolute release of like everything. It was a moment of release. It was like, so what? It's still an experiment. And if it's the worst event ever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
And the good thing about the experiment is, I always say that because I build my life around experiments. I say that when you do an experiment, you can fall, but you can lose. You cannot lose
Yeah,
because you are
absolutely.
experimenting, right?
Exactly.
And what's your receipt from your view, from your experience, for a remarkable life, Monique? Your own receipt.
I think genuine connection. But I think to a degree, knowing who you are, and I say to a degree because I don't think anyone knows 100% who they are. I don't know who 100% who I am, but knowing, that thing, know thyself, and honor thyself, is and I think to still be playful and curious. Curiosity and playfulness are just two absolutely fundamental things. Because they will always lead you to what your instinct tells you, because if you're curious and you're playful, I mean, if you think about a lion cub, chasing after a beetle and stalking behind its mother and attacking, that's basically how you discover how to live. And trust your body. Your body will tell you if things are right or not. Your instincts, you've got all sorts of very complex and amazing hormonal systems and which are related to your brain. I mean I know it's glib, but the human body is incredible, and if you don't listen to it, and I used that a hell of a lot in the bush. When I was in the bush, I'm very comfortable in the bush, very comfortable with wild animals, and if something didn't feel right, I would pay attention to it. And most of the time there was, oh shit, there's an elephant right on my back, or there's, this is happening, or a snake, whatever. Your body knows, because there are cues which are feeding in. And it's interesting because I think that operates living in South Africa as well, like with very high crime rates. Your body also knows, like if I could walk down a street 1 million times and feel fine. And when my stomach clenches or I get I pay more attention. I'm like, actually, maybe not. And yeah.
Monique, what message would you share with the listeners and the viewers to finish this interview? Apart from come to Afrika Burn, of course.
No, you don't have to come to Afrika Burn. You can come if you want. But no, listen to Isra on that. I think it's something around. I had a really good one, but it just left my head now. I think it's something around contemplating the world that we are in at the moment. We are at an inflection point. We are in the time of the ashes. We are in the time of change. We are in the underworld, And I think that it would be around honoring your creativity and not thinking that you can't make change, because what happens when you contemplate the shit that we are in globally is that you can become anesthetized as to what to do. But just keep doing the next right thing. And it's not a judgmental right, it's an internal right. And then another point that I would want to make, just because it's a thing on my mind in the world, because I keep, a lot of what I kind of do in my life is responding to what's happening in the default world. And what is happening is this radical pendulum swinging dichotomy, the hard binaries between this or that. And if you can come and inhabit that middle space and find each other, you've got to find each other, like you do, Isra, with putting your chair down and saying, I will listen. It's it's so important. It's because I think that, and the reason why it's so important is because that kills conversation. It just becomes a game of ping pong, unless you can find each other in the middle. I don't know if you know Daniel Schmachtenberger's Consilience Project, and they're just doing incredible work.
Yes. Monique, where people can find you on the internet?
And then
where people can
you can find the Afrika Burn website. I've got an Instagram handle, Monique Schiess. Yeah, but that's about it.
We share this. We share the links in the podcast show notes, and also share the links about the resources and people that you mentioned in the podcast. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
So, Monique, thank you for your honesty, your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience, and for bridging this gap between imagination and reason and the creativity and this making things happen. Also from this opportunity to get to know better, and also to get to know better what is Afrika Burn from a person that has been living through the Afrika Burn every year. For us, it's a privilege, an honor, and a total satisfaction to have you here. And wishing you, your team, Afrika Burn, and everybody and your family a very, very abundant life. And thank you for being in Disrupt Everything podcast series.
Super. Thank you so much for having me, Isra.
Thank you, Monique. So you had the Monique Schiess, the Afrika Burn, and creativity projects, focus maker, on habits, on how to progress leadership. So you had a very, very profound and rich interview. And the most thing to you that you are watching, you are reading, or maybe the transcript, or you are listening to this podcast is take action, small things, as keep doing the right next thing, as Monique said, because this is a good way to honor this half an hour that you devoted to this podcast and this video. Thank you for being in this Disrupt Everything podcast series. I never say leave a review or leave a star in Spotify. That sometimes I just remind this, and if you feel resonant with this, it helps us to get more people to reach this. If you're the listener, we had almost 5.3 million listenings and more than almost 250,000 downloads a month. So happy to have you in this community. Thank you, and keep disrupting and reinventing things.
Thank you for listening to the Disrupt Everything podcast series with Isra Garcia. You can listen to the podcast on any podcast platform or on isragarcia.s/podcast, where you'll find interviews with Seth Godin, Robin Sharma, Wim Hof, Kevin Kelly, Stephen Kotler, Joseph Ahram, Great Modern Stoics, Zen Masters, Shaolin Masters, Hollywood actors, New World sages, and many other disruptors, plus solo episodes with Isra. And the journey continues.